So now to the student-focused questions.
Okay.
What separates a student who just passes to an A student?
Sure. It's you need to say, this is where I went wrong. This is the feedback I've received. This is how I'm going to fix it. And that's the most important part. And then,
Advice to anyone that is dealing with failure, because I think that's a huge thing along the CASA stream.
100%.
Welcome back to another video. My name is Precious Molepo, and today I am joined by Reuben Davids, a chartered accountant as well as a lecturer at the University of the Witwatersrand. Hi, Reuben.
Hi, Precious.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So now to the student-focused questions. How do you separate a student that's failing to a student that's passing?
Sure. Right. So, okay, I'm going to answer because I've been both. I have been a student who has failed. What separates them? I think it really, your level of engagement with your schoolwork, and engagement can take many forms. It can take your personal studying. It can take you attending less lectures, attending tutorials, attending consultations, because that means it demonstrates how interested you are in your studies. And just because you're not attending lectures, I'm not saying you're not interested, but it just means you're not engaged with the work. At the end of the day, as a student, you're going to be assessed on this work. So when you sit at the end of the year in your final examination and you're asked questions, that's where you demonstrate how engaged you are with the content knowledge. So a student that fails, I'm not saying he's not engaged, but if they are engaged, maybe they're not engaged enough to understand that they don't understand a particular subject area and they've never done the work to learn that objective and execute it properly. Versus the student who passes, they understand what they need to know, they understand how they're going to be assessed on it, and they've prepared for that. And they demonstrate that at the end of the day on paper, because your final exam is really what sets you apart as the two students. You know? So definitely, I think ultimately it comes down to how engaged you were in your schoolwork. And I mean, I've been in a position where I was not engaged at all. I didn't attend classes at all. I didn't attend consultations at all, and that showed in my final examination.
All right.
So when I did the opposite, that's when I passed.
Okay. Yeah. So engage, as in you might not be performing very well, but you saying like, even though they're not performing well, as long as they have an element of engagement, they're already a step further than the student.
100%.
Okay.
Definitely. Because you as a lecturer would sometimes, I, for myself, feel like I'm not engaged when I don't have a question.
All right.
The minute somebody gives me information of any kind and I just receive that, yes, sometimes I might be processing it a little bit, but I always want to come back with a question.
Okay.
And that already means engagement.
Yes.
Sometimes you sit in a class and like I said, it's crickets, and then I know this did not land. They don't understand anything, and they're not currently critically thinking and analyzing what has been given to them. So that is what I mean when I say engagement.
Let's take it a step further. What separates a student who just passes to an A student?
Sure. Brilliant question. I think, and I'm going to be very practical in my response.
Okay.
Sometimes when you look at a memo, of any assessment that you're doing, there's a different range of marks. Right? Let's say we have a 10-mark question. Usually, 1 to 2 marks would be very high level. It would engage your deep thinking. It would be like you really need to have probed the information in such a way that you came up with these 2 points, right? We often refer to the high-level marks as the marks that the average student wouldn't be thinking about, but that does not mean there's 80% in that 10-mark question that they can't get.
Okay.
Right? And that's ultimately what separates the A student from the student who just passes.
Okay.
I think the A student is so engaged that they're able to make different kinds of connections that help them to engage their deeper thinking and then demonstrate that in an assessment.
Okay.
Whereas, the student who just passes, knows more than enough to engage fully on this topic. And I think, you know, if you think about the ITC, for example,
Yeah.
back when I wrote, I don't know if it's still like that, but I think if you get a 50%, you pass, you know, and you are, the assessment is often fair enough for everyone to pass, the average student.
ITC is the first board exam.
Yes, that's the first
just to
board
give
exam.
some context, yeah.
Yes, but then you still, at the end of those results, get a top 10.
Okay.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
And that top 10 for me are the A students. Those are the students that have allowed themselves to engage in a much deeper level, and they were able to respond in that way.
Okay, wait. What I'm understanding is they have the ability to think out of the box, so they're not
Yes.
limiting themselves
Yes,
to the...
to what's in front of them.
Yes, the subject matter. All right, cool. So that critical
Thinking.
thinking.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. What advice would you give to a student right now, especially in your new role as a lecturer? Looking back, you've been a student.
Yeah.
So what would you tell a student right now that's in university, studying accounting or just studying?
Yeah. One, understand why you're here. Demonstrate why you're here, because that ultimately is going to motivate you to wake up on those days where it's difficult. So I think you really need to do some soul searching, and being the student that failed. I failed in my second year of my Bachelor of Accounting qualification, and I stuck it through. And it was at that point in time when I realized I really want this, you know. So my advice would be, you need to find out how you engage with the work. You need to find out how you learn best as a student. I, for example, found that I learn by making summaries and then practicing questions, and I'm very particular about my filing system, you know, and those are some of the techniques I put in place for myself. Some students don't need to attend class and they can still pass. In fact, I remember in my CTA year, the top one or top two, one of the top two students as a student who never attended class, and they did very well.
Oh, wow.
So you need to figure out how you consume your knowledge in the best way. Some people can recite and stand in front of a mirror and they'll understand the work. Some people need to teach others to understand the work. And so try out different things. Try out different study methods and see which one works for you. Okay? And then you start refining that skill and that study method for yourself. I think it's very important for you, like I said, to be engaged with the work. I was a nagging student. I would nag my lecturers. I would nag my tutors. I would fight with my work. You know, I'd be like, I don't understand. I don't agree with how you marked here. Please explain to me why you did that. And I really made a voice for myself like that. My lecturers knew that after every assessment,
they knew your name.
I'm going to come fight, you know. But it's not fighting for marks, but it's really fighting for knowledge.
Okay.
And that's how I was engaged. So much so that lecturers at the end of the day knew that if anyone is going to ask a question in class today, it's going to be Reuben.
Okay.
You know, but that's how I best kept myself engaged in the learning material.
Yes.
Whereas I had other peers who never consulted, but they figured it out by themselves and they refined those skills. So build a passion for it, and then find out what is the best study method for you and refine that. Now, that being said, if your best study method is at midnight, between midnight and 4 o'clock, that's not going to happen. I would vehemently disadvise against that. And I understand, you know, sometimes circumstances forces us to do that.
Yeah.
But you can't do that the night before a big exam.
Yes.
You know, you're still going to write a 2-3 hour examination if you didn't sleep. Even though that study method works for you, I don't think you'll be able to show up properly in that assessment the next day. So that's also something to take into consideration. That you need to, in as much as you prepare well, you also need to assess well. So you need to know how to take a test or an exam.
Yes, that's very important. Yeah.
You know, and that has many things. Don't go and have a big bowl of slab chips before the exam. You're going to sleep in your paper. You know, rest the night before. So yes, learn study methods. Ask yourself why you want to be in this. And then ultimately put yourself in the best position possible to demonstrate your knowledge when it comes to an assessment.
Okay.
Yes.
Love that. Love that. And then what would you change if you had to? Actually, before we go there, you mentioned that you failed in your second year. Yes. I just want to touch on that a bit because results just came out for ITC. Today is, what's the date? we're recording this on the 6th of April.
Yeah.
So results came out for ITC yesterday, and then APC results as well. I think there was a 52% pass across the students who wrote. Advice to anyone that is dealing with failure, because I think that's a huge thing along the CASA stream.
100%. Failure is very difficult to deal with, and I can only empathize with that because sometimes you put in so much.
Yeah.
And it's a big disappointment not being able to get through that. You know, I've had a couple of failures. I also failed, I think, my first board for the first time as well. And it's very difficult to deal with. So first things first, let it out.
Okay.
Do what you need to do, you know, to get rid of the negative emotion that it comes with and the disappointment it comes with. And I've always been someone who said, if I need to go into that sad space of crying and wailing and, you know, being disappointed with myself, I allow myself to go through that. I don't think you should, you know, what do people do this? Like they put it aside because it's going to catch up with you and you're never really going to have processed those emotions. So let's deal with the emotion. Let's deal with the pain and the disappointment. And allow yourself, if it means you need to take a week or 2 weeks, if you need to eat a whole tub of ice cream, do it. And once you're out of it, let's face the music. The beautiful thing with failure is you're always left with feedback, you know?
Yes.
And in as much as it's painful, it is constructive. You know, if you failed a year or an exam, you'd be able to have access to, you know, the feedback and see where you went wrong.
Yes.
And let's now work towards fixing that. And sometimes you find it's a very small change you need to make and you'll pass. And that is just my advice as after you've cried, go and really do, you know, we often called it back in varsity, doing a post-mortem.
Yes.
And a post-mortem is like an autopsy
Yes.
of someone who died. And if you think about, you know, your dream of passing having died, you need to go figure out, let's resuscitate.
And it's so painful,
Yes.
listen, going back and performing
Yes.
that post-mortem.
Yes, no, definitely.
Post-mortem.
But after you've done that autopsy and that post-mortem, come out and you must be able to explain to the next person exactly where you went wrong and exactly how you can fix it. You know, somebody said something so interesting the other day. They said the thing with feedback is you can't just tell someone you did something wrong here, but you need to tell them how they can fix it. And that's
Yes.
ultimately the objective of a post-mortem. It's you need to say, this is where I went wrong. This is the feedback I've received. And this is how I'm going to fix it. And that's the most important part. And then after you've established how you need to fix it, now you just go and do that.
Yeah.
Do the work that requires you to fix that. Okay.
I love that.
So
yeah.
that's
Yeah, it is feedback. I think the narrative needs to change around failure. There's just a whole lot of insecurity when it comes to it. And I know it's easier said than done, but to definitely just take it as feedback. I also myself, I repeated CTA.
Yeah.
So I'm actually very passionate about changing the narrative of failure and speaking about it and,
Yeah.
you know, making it known to people that this happens to more people than you think it
Yes.
does, you know? So you shouldn't take it on yourself like, I'm a failure now.
Yeah.
It's not defining,
Yes.
which is important.
Yes. And I love that you mentioned that you're not the only one.
Exactly.
There's a lot of people who fail.
A lot.
A lot of us fail, you know? And I think what sets you apart ultimately as a chartered accountant is your ability to bounce back.
Big
You're going to
time.
meet a lot of failures in your life and you need to build the resilience from that. And I really want to say if you are unable to build the resilience and handle failure, then step aside because more's coming. You know,
Yes, I
and you
love
need
that.
to be fine with failure. And it's like you said, it's very difficult dealing with those emotions, but we need to get into a position where we are comfortable with those difficult emotions
Yes.
and dealing with coming out of them and fixing what we need to fix.
Definitely.
Because that sets you apart ultimately.
If you had to go back into your university days,
Yeah.
what is something you would change?
I think the comment I'm about to make would probably surprise a lot of people, but my favorite year in my course was my final year,
Okay.
which was CTA, your Bachelor of Accounting.
Which is like
Honors.
the
Very
hell.
difficult year.
Everybody.
That is a painful year.
Yeah.
And I had such an amazing year because at that point in time, I had been so used to failing. I had been knocked time and time again, and I got back up, you know. So at that point in time, if I received a fail in the paper, I could shrug it off very easily and say, okay, let's fix this. You know,
Yeah, that's
I
good.
know the emotions to deal with. So
Yeah.
I wish I wish if I could go back, I wish I would have been the student that I was in final year in my first year.
Oh.
Because then I never would have failed. Second year, delayed my process and progress, and, sort of taken a while to get to the end. However, I don't regret my journey. It really built me and made me who I am today. But as a first year student, I wish I had taken going to class serious.
Okay.
I came in, with that grade 12 mentality where you can study the day before and still pass.
That's the transition, actually.
Yes, it's a very big transition that you need to make in your first year. And I only learned that after second year.
Okay.
Which is very late. That's 24 months
and you
post-matric.
did BAK.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So that was late to be learning that lesson.
Yes.
So I wished I had, from first year, just saved myself and spared myself the pain of failing and just applied myself properly and engaged with my learning work.
Yeah. So I had a conversation with a friend of mine who studied, I think she's got a master's in psychology with focus on childhood education or development, but something related to education. And we spoke about, or she told me about how something as simple as a home having enough money or being able to afford those, those alphabets that you stick on the fridge for a child compared to a home that doesn't have enough money for those alphabets that you stick on the fridge. So educational toys can have an impact later on at a university level, like when those two students are in university, on how they receive information, how long it takes for them to reach a point of understanding. That being said, do you think a student's background impacts how they perform in university?
Yes, definitely. From my experience, though, I've only seen it in one particular area.
Okay.
And it's not from an intellectual place. I think, if you are in university as a whole, in any course, you definitely have the potential to be there because it's a rigorous application process. You have to demonstrate why you qualify for the qualification.
Yes.
Or to get into the qualification. So
especially at WITS.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't think it's an intellect issue, but the one thing I've come across quite often, and I've also experienced, is language gaps.
Oh, okay.
Many a times, all the times, students are assessed in English. And sometimes just one word that a student doesn't understand or misinterpret it can impact their score. That's something I have come across quite a lot. And sometimes they use, very interesting jargon in an assessment or in a book. And I think, yes, at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to go and learn terminologies. If you don't understand a word, Google it, figure out what it means and then move on from that. But oftentimes it's not really the subject or the subject matter that throws people off, but it's just the language and specifically English. For many of us, English is not our home language. And if you're going to use a word I don't understand, like if I say a sentence and there's one word that you don't understand, it might impact how you receive what I'm trying to communicate. And that is what I've seen is quite an issue,
How do you
from
think
background perspective.
both students as well as universities can work around that?
Really expose yourself to the English language as a whole. And I mean, there's many ways, if you can watch TV, if you can have peers who are proficient in the English language and just engage with them on a day-to-day basis, because that will expose you to some of these terms. So you hear the word on TV, you don't understand it, you go Google it. Next thing you hear it in an assessment, and luckily you know what it means. So in a test or in an exam is not the time to be trying to figure out what does a word mean.
Yeah.
So I think really honestly expose yourself to your language of assessment. And universities have also put in a lot of measures to help bridge that gap for students. To expose them to the English language, literally as a language, so that they can absorb information a bit easier. I think that's the one thing. And then the second thing from a background perspective is definitely just students' exposure to, I'm going to use the word life and industry. because sometimes you get into an exam and they're speaking about Bitcoin, for example, and they're going to assess you on something involving the industry of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're not expected to be an expert in it, but you need to have an idea. If anybody were to ask me now what Bitcoin is, and I'd be like, it's something in the data space, some kind of currency. I have an idea around what Bitcoin is. And I do think someone's background can impact the exposure to things like this. Sometimes something as simple as saying a CFO. If a student hasn't heard the term CFO, they wouldn't even know what CFO stands for, which is probably Chief Financial Officer.
Yeah.
But okay, fine. Now that I've told you it's a Chief Financial Officer, what is that? What does it do? And I think our backgrounds can really impact that as well.
Yeah.
Because not many of us have access to these kinds of people and industries, and that really impacts how you interpret certain
Definitely.
information in your assessments.
Yes.
So definitely, but again, I don't think it's an intellect issue. Like, anybody can really grasp the technicalities of the subject matter, but it's really these little nuances that play a big role in how you perform.
Yeah. Okay, so basically expose yourself and
Yes.
read books and,
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a tricky one. I mean, it also you look at the area a person comes from, like how you mentioned, expose yourself to people that speak the language. Like, what if you don't have any person that speaks English in the area? So I think assess the situation, but definitely be proactive.
Absolutely.
In whichever situation that you're in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Then there's the private school, public school debate.
Yeah.
There's one train of thought that says, take your child to private school because quality education. I mean, this is in the context of South Africa, of course. Take your child to private school because quality education. And then there's the public school side where, okay, I'm going to take my child to public school because they're going to end up in the same university anyway.
Yes.
So my question is, do students that went to a private school and a public school, when compared, do they perform differently in university? At least from what you've seen, if you've seen.
I don't think so. Ultimately, it comes down to your understanding of the technical content. But back to the point I previously mentioned about the exposure, I think private schools generally have a lot more resources to expose students to business acumen and the English language. So it definitely sets those students apart from, an engagement perspective. Like, they can more easily interpret information and understand information, and simply because they've been granted the opportunity to have that exposure. But public school and private school from an academic perspective, I've not really seen a big difference. Again, from an academic perspective, so if I speak about the actual paper, the actual test and exam, but if you think about classroom engagement, if you think about if there's a group project and someone needs to present, the person who's more confident in speaking in the English language, for example, would be the one presenting on behalf of the group. If it was an individual assessment, that student would most likely score a little bit higher because of that benefit and advantage that they had coming up. But intellectually, I don't think so. I've not seen that. I have been in class with both students who, and when I say been in class, I mean as a student.
As a student, yeah.
I come from a public school, and I was in class with students from a private school, and when we all failed, we failed together, But when we passed together.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think just those little nuances
Yeah.
of engaging business acumen. Also, sometimes students come into the qualification and they don't really know what chartered accountants do or are. And they just got there because they did very well in, for example, maths and accounting. Whereas the private school student would probably have a bit more direction in that regard. Like, they know they want to study this, they know what it comprises of, and they have that background, But at the end of the day, again, like you said, be proactive, expose yourself, and surely that gap should be bridged very easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a really high unemployment rate in South Africa. Specifically, I mean, because we're speaking accounting, accounting graduates
Yeah.
are sitting at home with accounting degrees and they can't find jobs.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to them?
Sure, it's difficult. Given that opportunities are so limited. But I do want to say you need to try and set yourself apart from the rest. I mean, there's so many accounting degrees out there. And now what sets accounting degree A apart from accounting degree B? Because both of them are the qualification, and that means you've passed, you've demonstrated competence in this area. But what is a degree if you don't have a skill?
Yeah.
What is a degree if you cannot implement that? Business needs a lot of help out there. Business needs people who can conceptualize and understand how can we improve, right? So I think it's important for you to equip yourself with the knowledge of what business needs. Sometimes if you just go on, for example, a job post, you can see the requirements for that role. Sometimes you need to have skills in Word, Microsoft, PowerPoint, etc. Sometimes you need to have bookkeeping skills, and try and engage with what you have and see how you can demonstrate that. If there is an uncle, an aunt, a family member who works at a company where you can just go and shadow, even if it means you must make coffee, just so you can see what they do. What do accountants actually really do? Let's get down to the crux of what do they do? What does their day-to-day look like? And if you can expose yourself to that, please do so, because that will help you now build skills that you can put on your CV and go out there and say, you know what, I have the skill. Because business, honestly, I think about the industry. Business needs help. Business doesn't have the resources. Not all businesses have the resources to come and train someone for 2-3 months before they can start doing the work. I need you to walk in right now and help me fix whatever problem I have right now. So I think it's important, yes, in addition with your degree, package some skills with that. So look at what skills is required for the role you want and try and demonstrate that, even if you're doing bookkeeping for the Sunday school at church, where someone can give you a reference for that. That is a skill where I can be like, okay, fine, this person already is proactive. They can use what they have.
Love that.
So definitely try and start building skills, because most academic institutions only give you the theoretical knowledge and they don't really give you practical experience. And it's up to you to really build those skills.
Yeah. And then another path is for an accounting graduate that's not finding a job to pursue the entrepreneurial side of things. As an expert in your field, no pressure. I mean, chartered accountants are experts in their field.
Yeah.
You have 100 Rand in your pocket. What business are you starting?
Wow. Okay. The first thought that comes to mind is, and I won't mention their name,
Of course.
but there's a fragrance company that allows sales agents to purchase fragrances and sell them on for a profit. That's what I've seen, and I've seen some of those stores in like centrums, in malls, and I've sometimes seen people go with big bags, and I just see.
Are these those tiny ones?
Yes.
Those cylinder ones. Are those genuine though?
I mean, we can speak on that, but apparently there's a market for it.
Okay.
So I think I would do that with 100 Rand, and I've seen that they say if you want to be a sales agent, you can purchase it for like 30 Rand.
Okay.
And then on-sell it for probably double the price.
Okay.
So with 100 Rand, I'd buy 3 of those.
Okay.
And sell all 3 of those, or buy 3, wear 1, and walk around everywhere.
Okay.
And if somebody says, "What are you wearing?"
Where are you walking? Where are you walking though?
Walk in a mall. Walk.
Do you think someone would stop you to ask what
Yes.
you're okay?
Yes. I've stopped many people and be like, that scent's very nice. Where do you get that? Like the
Yeah,
other day,
nice.
I was at the barber shop and one of the barbers walked past me and I'm like, what is that smell? That smells very nice. And just that easily he could have sold whatever he was wearing to me. Because I was like, this smells very nice. I want to smell like that.
Okay.
So with my 100 Rand, that's definitely what I'm doing. And then build profit and capital and eventually see where you can get with that.
I love it. Okay, so in closing, maybe give us 5 study tips.
5 study tips.
Yeah. For someone pursuing the chartered accountancy journey, for someone in university, maybe struggling in accounting, or someone who's considering whether they should go into accounting.
Yeah. Disclaimer, studying
Yes.
is not a once-off event. It's not I'm writing a test tomorrow, I'm studying today. So I think it's an ongoing learning process. So I would say, first of all, before a lesson or a lecture, prepare. What does preparing look like? When I prepared, I would read and summarize, but you can just read as well. So read before you go into a lecture. That's study tip number one. Be it and make notes if you can. Attend the lecture, make notes in the lecture, and if you can and you are keen enough, ask questions in the lecture. Right. So now you already have two, what do you call it, pieces of output. The first output is the first summaries that you've made based on your own understanding. Now you have additional summaries that you've gotten from your lecture hall because your lecturer gave you, study tips and the information that you need to know. Then after that, go and make it look nice when you go home. So put the two together, right? And finalize and make it comprehensive and make sure that it's in your own words. So that is now, your real studying. That's where you're like, okay, fine, this is what I understand under the thing, right? So that's point 3. Point 4, now you take whatever assessment material you have, a past paper, past question, and you now do the question, right? And you mark yourself. That's another output because now you have a question and you have marks. You have ticks on it and you have feedback. Okay, this is where I went right and this is where I went wrong. And then lastly, with that, I always have on my questions, I call it the T section. I did mention earlier that I love Reuben. So I call it, this is my T section. So we're going to spill the tea. And when I spill the tea on my attempt, I say, this is where I went wrong, this is where I went right, this is what I need to know, and this is how I need to think about a particular area. Right. So, for example, if there's a concept I misunderstood, I'd be like, okay, this is how I thought about the concept and I answered it in this way, but technically I should have thought about it in this way, right? Don't make it question specific, but make it principle specific.
Okay.
Say, the difference between right and wrong is this. Not in this question, Susan said this and I should have said that. That is not relevant, The question is not relevant, but the principle is relevant. So make sure that you demonstrate that principle in your T section. And then lastly, go back to that final set of notes that you made and go and upskill it and say, okay, fine, remember that I need to know this. So those are the 5 things that you need to do and the 5 output levels that you need to have.
Love it. I can see your passion come out when you speak about studying. Love it. So what are your plans for your content creation?
Definitely to continue giving study tips. I think I want to now take on an approach where I answer specific questions from my audience.
Okay.
So I have initially gone into it with what I think they need to hear, and that was very well received. But now I want them to tell me, okay, this is what I need help with, and I want to answer that specifically. Also want to bring in experts where they know a bit more. So if somebody has a very hectic tax question, I want to engage a tax specialist and say, okay, fine, in my context and in the student's context, how can we answer their question? So that's definitely where I plan on going with Study with Reuben.
Love that. And then where can people find your content?
They can find it on Instagram. The page is called Study with Reuben. They can also find me on LinkedIn at Reuben Davids, and that's usually where you'll be able to access my content.
Thank you so much. I had a delightful time.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Precious.
And thank you for being open to it, because I reached out to you on Instagram and you replied saying, let's do it. Yeah. To the point where I'm just like, maybe I should slow down with asking people, because my schedule's really tight.
Yeah.
We just got out of busy season. And I'm like, okay, let me pop this person a message. Hopefully in the next month or 2, they'll have availability. And more times than often, like, it's let's do it. Let's do it this weekend. Let's do it next month. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'm really counting my blessings when it comes to that. Thank you so much for watching this episode, you guys. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. As you heard, find Reuben on LinkedIn, find him on Instagram. His content is great. I actually still scroll through it. Even though I'm past my university days, I do go through it. I love it. Keep up the great work. You're doing a great job.
Will do.
Thank you for watching this episode. Until my next video. Bye.